admission cycle or the July admission cycle. So what are you waiting for? You go to IGNOU Samarth admission portal and register yourself.
Hello learners and the programs PGDEML and MAENOH, that is a postgraduate diploma in environmental management and law, and the MA and the PG diplomas in environmental and occupational health. The course code for today's session is MEV 003, that is environmental law and management. So today we will discuss about the wild living resources. So there are many of the vulnerable, critically endangered, and also extinct species which all of you would have read in the books, in articles, in the newspapers. And let us now see the various type of the species that are present in the earth, and this biodiversity or the biological diversity, which is a great wealth to the environment, also to humanity, and all the different, the precious resources that they contain, and how we directly or indirectly benefit from these services. So let us start with a case study. Now, in context to the American crane, whooping crane, and the California condor. So these are North America's largest birds, and these are rare and endangered birds which are protected, and they are protected in the biosphere reserves and so on. So these, for example, if we take the American whooping crane, this has a height of almost 5 feet, and the California condor, the wingspan is almost 9 feet. So you can see that this condor, since the wingspan is 9 feet, so it requires a lot of open space for it to land anywhere and also to take off. So such kind of an open grassland or open space is required for this bird to survive in its habitat. So large reserves are actually set aside for them, where they can actually be reared and they can be protected in their original or wild form. Now they respond differently to the conservation efforts. Let's take both as an example. In the now as 14, and after some conservation efforts by the scientists and researchers, this population rose up to 183 cranes by the year 1991. So this preservation of this whooping crane population was a success story. Condor. So in 1840, this species started declining, and we find that there were diminished populations. Now when it went on to 1970s, there were only 25 of these condors that were available, and so there was a lot of decline in these population. Again, by recovering, what did the scientists do? They started rearing them in the protected environments, and also captive breeding was also done. And then the chicks, they were laid in these captive breeding sites, and those that hatched from these eggs, then they were again returned to the wild. Now let me ask you one question. Can these birds which are in a captive breeding, can they adjust to the normal wild situations once they are returned to their original habitat? So this is what happened, that when they were returned to the original habitats, due to some environmental pollution and toxic substances that were there in that environment, some of the condors they could not adjust to this environment, and they started again declining in their population. So they responded differently to both these habitats. So the feeding habitats of the crane and the condor are also different. Now, when we compare with the crane, they actually feed on the small aquatic animals or the insects that are present in the wetland. When it comes to the condor, they require the large animals, the deer and also the carrion. So thereby the food became scarce for them. Some areas which were actually open grasslands, now these are now dense chaparral and the woodland. So when it becomes so dense, then it is not possible for the condors to survive there and to adjust to these congested and the dense settings. So what do we understand from this story or from this case study? That for an endangered species, though we do the conservation efforts, and the conservation efforts are a success only when the habitats are in good condition. Only when the ecosystem and the original habitat is in good condition, in good health, only then we can protect these species and recover these species. Now let us also give an example of the Aransas National Wildlife Refuge in Texas. So here, in this place, it was observed that here also it was severely eroding the biosphere, and also a lot of species were disappearing annually into the Gulf of Mexico. Why? Because there was a special digging that was going on for the passage of commerce between the refuge and between the barrier islands. So again, wildlife preservation efforts will only be successful when there is no environmental pollution, when all these habitats of the species are in good condition. So that is the first thing that has to be taken into account. So now let us have a comparison that for crane, as I said, this feeds on the smaller insects or on the aquatic animals, whereas the condor, this feeds on the carrion, which is scarce. So therefore, conserving wildlife is very important, and there are many reasons where we have to preserve this wildlife and limiting the natural and also the human-induced risk to them. We can improve the ways for the conservation, and these wild creatures, they are a symbol of wilderness. For example, when Christmas, now it is all the sledges, the snow, and all those wonderful creatures or the animals that survive in such harsh conditions or in such freezing conditions. So such wild creatures or the wilderness, that is reminding you of such animals and such those species which are also very important for human survival. So wild creatures are managed in habitats so that they feed in a manner, they reproduce in a manner with the limited and then we can actually see them in a naturalistic habitat. Conserving wildlife. Now, most of us think that when we visit a zoo, right, whenever we take a tour or any of the tourism in our families or with friends, then we always say that, okay, let's go to the nearby zoo or wildlife reserve. So here we find that some of the animal species, they are really preserved well, and we find them in a very ordered manner. Like you have the birds, then you have certain insects, you have the aquatic mammals and the animals, then you also have the fishes, you have the invertebrates, and then you also have the larger mammals. You have the orangutans, the giraffe, the rhinoceros. Everything is really, it is delightful to see all these creatures. Then, so this is by preserving these animals or the living organisms in their live condition in certain special parks and in the zoos. Then the next form of conserving the wildlife is preserving the frozen cells that contain the DNA or the genetic material, actually being preserved in cold storage, and again the animal can be reproduced or cloned, and then so these cells are there always for the research, for the medical purposes and so on. So these are some ways of conserving the wildlife. Then when we talk about the biological diversity, we should also know what is IUCN. So the International Union for the Conservation of Nature's Red List of the Threatened Species, this was established in 1964, and this has evolved to become the world's most comprehensive information source on the worldwide on the global IUCN Red List. That actually gives you an indicator of the health of the biodiversity, and this is a powerful tool for the policymakers, for the scientists, for the conservationists, the biodiversity conservationists, for the environmentalists, and for the policy change people, critical in order to protect these natural resources that we need for our survival. This IUCN It then divides the species into 9 different categories. That includes not evaluated, that is those species which have not been evaluated, data deficient, where we do not find the sufficient data which is available, least concerned, which is near threatened species, then vulnerable species, the endangered species that are critically endangered, and then that are extinct in the wild and also which have gone totally extinct. So the IUCN is dividing these species into these 9 categories. Then when we talk about the threatened species or the endangered species, so these species are in danger of extinction and they can be again divided into several categories. That includes the endangered, the vulnerable, the rare species and also the indeterminate species. So when we label a species as a threatened species, so that means that is at risk of being lost in the wild, that is at risk of being extinct, and more conservation efforts are required in order to bring back the habitat in its original condition. So habitat restoration is very important. Ecosystem services need to be restored in that special habitat where this organism is living. And also, if possible, if in the biosphere reserves or in zoos or in sanctuaries, in parks, if these animals can be maintained, then that again would be a good thing to do. Now, in this category of threatened species, we have the IUCN Red List of the endangered animals and also the endangered plants. So when it comes to the threatened or the endangered animals, more than 46,300 species are threatened with extinction. This is the report of 2024, and this includes 41% of the amphibians, 26% mammals, 12% of the birds, the 44% of the coral reefs, 34% conifers, and 21% reptiles, and we have the 71% of cycads, which are the plants. When it comes to the plants, we find that the 38% of the world trees, that is 1 out of 3 of the tree species, are threatened. 34% of the conifers, from where we get the pines, and also 71% of the cycad species, they are all threatened. So they are at a threat for extinction, and in the near future we may not be able to see these plants at all. Let us see some examples and some photographs of certain animals which are threatened. So this is a crowned lemur. You can see here, so this is an endangered animal which is actually seen in some of the sanctuaries. Then we find the red panda, which is again a very vulnerable and an endangered species. Then the iguana lizard. This is also an endangered species which belongs to the reptiles category. The Asiatic lion, okay, where we are finding this in Asia and in our continent. So all these animals are endangered. And just take 1 minute to think. Suppose all these species were lost, and tomorrow we do not see these species at all. Tomorrow our children, Asiatic lion do not know what a lion, how a lion or a tiger looks like. So you can see the condition. So it is also very important for us to understand the concept of ecological justification. Utilitarian should go together. So any development, economic development, should not be at the cost that we lose all these species and the animal and the plant species which are most important for our survival. Now comes to the question, why do we have to save these endangered species? First, as I said, utilitarian justification, so the genetic characteristics. Right? So now we are finding different types of the basmati rice which we can eat. Long and slender, thin, thick, the different aroma, different taste. It could be red rice, it could be the white rice, it could be the black rice, it could be from the red rice of Assam, black rice from the Tamil Nadu. All these have rich genetic characteristics, high protein content, anthocyanin content. So where are all these coming from? So we have the wild varieties. In conserving these wild grains and the wild crops, we can make the hybrid ones which can even be more disease resistant, which can have more protein content, which can also help sustain life on this universe. Chemical and the medical uses. So from time immemorial, we know that the plants are a gift and a boon to mankind, where many of the medicines have been discovered. So one thing which comes to our mind is penicillin, we have streptomycin. Now we have digitalis, which is used for the heart ailments. Then we have the antihypertensive drugs which come from the serpent wood. Then we have the aspirin which comes from the willow bark. We have antibiotics from the tropical fungi and so on. Again, even in our day-to-day use, after the corona pandemic, most of us have started using Trifala or have started using many of the Ayurvedic, Siddha and also the homeopathic combinations, which all or how we can use it safely for our consumption, even for the hair growth, right? Using maybe the neem or the hibiscus flowers for their oil purposes, also the leaf from the curry leaf, which can also be used as an oil, the amla or the bringraj. So all these are the plant species, and think of 1 minute, if we are to lose all these species, then where would we get all these medicinal benefits? So that is only a small portion that we are using in the drugs or in the manufacture of these medical compounds, and there are still many of them which are unknown, which are still not discovered, and still a lot of research exists, a lot of work is to be done in order to explore the potential of all these plant species. Again, another important thing is why to save the endangered species is to develop the new crops and also the commercial products. Also indigenous people. So the biodiversity is of great importance to many of the indigenous people, for which where this biodiversity or this diversity provides the food, then the shelter, the tools, and for example, if you go in many parts of the world, we find the basket making, the bamboo making, also the canoe or the boat making, right, and also the manufacture of the caps and the hats. All this, it is by the indigenous people. Also, they also market, for example, the insects species. Some of them are fond of eating the local insects or the fish varieties, which are actually exported and imported by these locals that are thriving there. Also, the wonderful cuisine that they are able to prepare on these beaches, on these places which are rich of this diversity. So the indigenous people, they have a good value and good knowledge of the plant species, which could be even used to treat the snake bites and scorpion bite and so on, in addition to the cuisine and also the marketing, eco-friendly enterprises and the market-friendly options. Then pollution control. There are several aquatic species, the filter feeding organisms. They are able to trap these toxic substances, thereby they are protecting our wetlands and the marine regions and ecosystems. Then again, we have several of the fungi, the bacteria, the plants, which can remove certain toxic substances which are used in the bioremediation processes for the for clearing the environmental pollution from the air, the water, and also the soil. Then for tourism, so as I said about the indigenous people and their knowledge systems, so this can also be linked to the ecotourism, where the people are having a rich knowledge of the tourist spot of these places. For example, the coral reefs, without disturbing these coral reefs, this is a beautiful sight to see, and then the tourists can have a look at the plant species there, the flora and the fauna, and understand the diversity in that region. For example, touring a place, by seeing a place, people also understands which are also identified as special sites. For example, we find Ramsar sites, the wetlands of importance, and so on. Medical research. Now, one example is armadillo. So this is an animal species, and that is one of the two species which is known to contract leprosy. So the medical research is very important for the scientists to understand and to know why this special species, why these two species are able to contract this leprosy which comes in the human beings, and how to cure and how to give a treatment for them. So again, these endangered species, by protecting them, by conserving them, so it also helps in these type of the research and also in the basic as well as the applied research mechanisms. Ecological, so that was all about the utilitarian justification. Now coming on to the ecological justification. So now we are not talking about the benefits that they are doing only for the human being. So there is also an ecological wealth. Organisms are essential to maintain the entire functioning of the ecosystem. So this could be the provisioning services, the regulating services. For example, they are giving you air to breathe. They are giving you the good water, the fresh water, the marine sources, right? So much. So these ecosystems and the biosphere, so there is ecological justification that indirectly the nature is connected to us, and through the food chain, through the food webs, we are directly connected to nature and we require them for our survival. So without them, we do not exist. Individual species, ecosystems, and their biosphere and the services, they provide public service functions, and they are essential for the persistence of life, for the nutrient cycling, biochemical cycling of the elements, and for the formation of the rain, for evaporation, for the water cycle, and so on. And then we also have to know something about the keystone species. These species, they carry out an essential function, essential mechanism where the functioning of the ecosystem is indirectly benefiting us. So even if they are not directly, they are helping us. Indirectly, these organisms contribute a lot to the biosphere and the functioning of the ecological reserves. So all this comes to the point that why we need to conserve the forest. Definitely, forests are the health, and that is why forest bathing is also practiced in many of the countries. Just walk through the forest and how good you feel like, the fresh air that you are breathing, right? So they retard the soil loss and the erosion, they stabilize the water supply and the runoff, there is nutrient cycling, dispersal of the seeds, pollination, and also the germination. Aesthetic and the cultural justification. So biodiversity, this adds quality of life, beautiful and appealing. Just like you wear beautiful colors, right? Colors, this are able to ignite happiness in a person, whether it is pink, whether it is red. Nature and the artist, right? He paints, and even the dance forms, various Indian dance forms, and various Indian music forms, right? People wear the bright colors. So the culture and the art and these colors, they are all related to each other. In the same way, when we look at an animal, those natural colors, the natural color of the sky, the mountain, the waters, right? All this is so beautiful to see. So that is what biodiversity adds life to us, adds quality, adds beauty to the entire biosphere. The coral reef islands is such a beauty. Many of the organisms, flowers, they are appreciated for their beauty and the natural colors. So people are inspired by nature in order to create and even weave the colors even on the saris or other motifs on the cloth. Certain animals also have cultural significance. For example, the United States of America, when they were founded, when the state was founded, they had the bald eagle as their logo, and this was adopted, and this bald eagle was actually an endangered species. Moral justification is very important, that the people should believe that every species has a moral right to exist other than only the humans. So that is why many people, the Americans, they do not eat the tuna fish because they are not caught with the proper methods, and along with this, the porpoises that swim along with the tuna fish are also caught or killed in the process. So we should not cause harm to any other organism. Now, there are also several causes of extinction. It could be due to natural, the population risk, where there is a lot of population growing, then environmental risk. Then one example is the butterflies in the Colorado mountain. So these butterflies, they laid their eggs in the open flower buds of a single species of the legume plants, lupine, and hatched caterpillars actually feed on these flowers. 1 year, when there was late snow and the freeze, that killed all the flower buds, and so the caterpillars had no food to eat. Think of a situation, if that was a last population and there were no butterflies at all of that population, that would have gone extinct. So this is what we have to understand from this, that the entire species would have gone extinct. So that was a local population that had gone extinct. So natural catastrophe like this, the example that we have seen because of the snow. In Krakatoa in Indonesia in 1883, there was a worst natural catastrophe which actually killed all the life forms over there. Then there could be genetic risk which causes mutation, genetic drift and also variation, and unintentional when people started poaching and killing it for other purposes. And also exotic species. So now we find that there are several exotic species. You find oranges everywhere in the world. corn, wheat, and even avocado. You can find them anywhere in the world. So they are grown. So this is how that the species of the plants and animals are moved around the globe. Even the turkey eggs were sent from Canada to China. So that's how the introduction of the exotic species are done world over, and sometimes the exotic species can also take over and invasive species can also take over. Now there is also commercial trade in the endangered species. Now some of you would have seen that the leather or the fur or the ivory which is obtained from the elephant's tusk, and also from the bones from the rhinoceros, right, and also many other species. So they're all used for the different purposes, also in certain medicinal uses. So they are being traded heavily. So that should not be done. And all the examples that I showed you, the Asiatic lion, black bear, the sloth bear, the giant panda, the tiger, the grizzly brown bear, from all these animals, these products are being taken, and sometimes these animals are killed in order to get the fur or in order to get that medicinal product, or even the ivory or the horn. So you're actually causing damage, and also you're also killing the species for obtaining a product for your own luxury and enjoyment. Finally, we come to CITES, which is a convention on the international trade in endangered species, wild flora and fauna, an international agreement between the governments. And this is to ensure that the international trade in the specimens of the wild animals and plants does not threaten the survival of the species. So this was drafted as a resolution adopted in 1963, and on the 1st of July in 1975, this entered into force. Therefore, conservation is utmost and very much important. We can do conservation in ex situ conservation and in situ conservation, where ex situ is ex, that is, it is outside the habitat of the organism. It could be the zoo or gardens or nursery. In situ conservation, where it is actually the habitat of the organism, where we are conserving them in the sanctuaries. And concluding today's session, it says that we need to strike a balance between conservation and development, and the conservation approach should also integrate the local livelihoods, the indigenous people whose livelihoods are totally dependent on this. Therefore, development and conservation should go hand in hand, and the ecosystem services, species restoration, species protection, and the habitat conservation. All these are very important for the conservation framework. So my dear learners, I hope you found this session interesting and informating regarding the wild endangered resources and how also for the entire biosphere and for the functioning of the survivation listening.